At the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima took the stage on behalf of President Bola Tinubu with a message that was clear and urgent. The world can't afford to sit still while crisis deepens. He called for a UN that reflects today's realities, not the world of 1945, and pushed for Nigeria to have a permanent seat on the Security Council that he said would be part of a broader effort to make global institutions fairer and more effective. Vice President Shettima laid out 4 big priorities: reforming the UN system, easing sovereign debt so developing nations can grow, making sure countries that supply critical minerals actually benefit from them, and closing the digital divide, reminding delegates that AI must mean Africa included. Now, on peace and security, he spoke candidly about Nigeria's own fight against extremism and his long record of peacekeeping. He condemned civilian suffering in Gaza and repeated Nigeria's support for a 2-state solution as the most realistic path to lasting peace.
Development and human rights. Madam President, I want to make 4 points today to outline how we can do this. 1, Nigeria must have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. This should take place. We need urgent action to promote sovereign debt relief and access to trade and financing. 3, countries that host minerals must benefit from those minerals. And 4th, the digital divide must close. As our friend the Secretary General has said, AI must stand for Africa included. This is why we are not indifferent to the devastations of our neighbors near and distant. This is why we speak of the violence and aggression visited upon innocent civilians in Gaza, the illegal attack on Qatar, and the tensions that scar the wider region. It is not only because of the culture of impunity that makes such acts intolerable, but because our own bitter experience has taught us that such violence never ends where it begins.
Now, he also linked economic reform, climate action, and debt restructuring directly to global stability, even proposing a new global mechanism to handle sovereign debt. He stressed that Africa should be part of the clean tech and digital revolutions and not left behind. His closing thought was simple but powerful: Nigeria's commitment to multilateralism, peace and human dignity isn't up for negotiation because, as he put it, none of us is safe until all of us are safe.
But it's an article of faith remains our surest path forward. Nigeria dedicates itself fully and without reservation to that noble cause. I thank you all for listening.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Broadly on the continent, African leaders are also making their voices heard at the general debates. They are demanding long overdue reforms to the global order, starting with a permanent African seat on the UN Security Council, calling its absence a historic injustice. Climate change is another urgent priority. Leaders like Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa warn is reversing development gains and worsening poverty, even though Africa contributes least to global emissions. As global trade becomes a geopolitical weapon, African nations want a fairer system that supports growth instead of deepening inequality. Dr. Patrick Coker, a former spokesperson UN mission in Sierra Leone, joins me on World Now for more analysis of African addressed by African leaders at the UNGA. Good to have you join us, Dr. Coker.
Thank you very much.
So from Nigeria's president, that's true, his vice president, to the president of Kenya, we've heard from president of South Africa, Senegal and Liberia. What do you make of the UNG addressed by African leaders, especially when you compare with previous years?
Thank you very much. It is quite resounding that these leaders, more or less, probably without even seeing each other's scripts, have spoken with one voice. We cannot say these issues they have raised are new. However, they have focused on these matters for the world to address. Nevertheless, most of what they spoke about supported the ideas and proposals of the UN Secretary General, which came out in the UNGA UN at 80 report with the title Shifting Paradigm, United to Deliver.
And then I like that you mentioned just a common thread, we see running through all of the speeches, whether it's climate change, the permanent seat, and then issues around, recognizing maybe the war in Gaza. It seems, like they compared notes. Why haven't we been doing this in terms of maybe not comparing notes, but ensuring that the issues that matter to the continent, are put on the front burner when we leave the shores of this country to address global leaders?
Elsewhere, it's been described that the UN is under stress and indeed being transformed. Insiders have told me that UN has, I won't say sacked, but relieved of their duties thousands of staff. UN is not well funded as we speak. The multilateralism that typifies the work of the UN has witnessed rivalry amongst great powers. There is fragmentation, and indeed equity and fairness is really, really diminishing. So the UN is actually, or the globe is actually witnessing tough times, especially with all the conflicts all over the world, that world leaders should have come together through the Security Council and its non-permanent members to resolve. Rather, the world is in serious crisis. In fact, protectionism and unilateralism is really, really in fact, also regionalism is a trend today. Of course, the UN is getting the bashing, as we have witnessed. However, the UN is indispensable. And the UN remains
So one of the things that we also heard was President Tinubu pushing for Nigeria to have a permanent seat on the Security Council to make global institutions fairer and more effective. But for President Ruto of Kenya, he talked about reforms, and I mean, a very fiery statement he made. He said UN reforms are not a favor for Africa, but a necessity for the organization's own survival. How valid are these statements?
I must say these statements are valid. They buttress the fact that there must be equity and, legitimacy, as it were. And as mentioned in the speech by the President Tinubu, you will find out that we're not in 1945, when in 2025, things have happened and the UN must evolve. Furthermore, I can also confirm here that the report by the SG has really identified the need for deep reforms, and it is really cutting down on its activities today, there are three paradigms this report has emphasized: everyday work, cross-pillar work, and enabling, the paradigm of enabling impact. And these will sit on four key areas: peace and security, humanitarian assistance. We also have the human rights and sustainable development. You agree with me that we are at midpoint assessment of the SDGs, and the UN by 2030 will have reached the benchmark for the SDGs. Africa is still lagging behind, and there is need for more resources to be channeled towards supporting Africa to attain these realities. You also agree that it is not enough for the UN to do its part. Every nation, indeed every African nation, must also stand up to these challenges. Not just the federal government, as it were in the case of Nigeria, but also sub-nationals like states, indeed local government. They must be attuned with these SDG goals and work towards achieving those goals. So basically, it is time for the world to reform. It is also time for great leaders or great powers to consider the voices of a place like Africa, where indeed the natural resources mainly support technology and development in their capitals and indeed in their countries.
Dr. Cook, I'll put you on hold. Interesting points you made there. I would like us to unpack it when we return from this break. Stay with us, everyone.